It feels like it's going to be, I know McKinsey said 1.8 trillion. It feels like in 10 years, it might be even bigger than that. How large do you expect this space economy to grow?
Yeah, look, I think it's kind of akin to AI in many respects, and the largest thing that to be done in space hasn't even been thought of yet. And it's an exciting time because when I think back, even 10 years ago, there was always the promise of a tremendous amount of growth within the space industry. But now you see large companies, the Apples and Amazons of the world, providing large infrastructure plays in space. So it is really, the promise is starting to be delivered of just the sheer scale of the space industry growth.
Okay, folks, welcome to our analysis of Rocket Lab's ticker symbol RKLB, NASDAQ traded stock. And what we're going to talk about today is whether or not, we'll conclude with whether or not we believe that Rocket Labs is a buy. But first, we're going to walk through a space industry overview. We're going to talk about the leaders in that space. Then we'll segue into some company history. The gentleman you just saw was Peter Beck, CEO, founder of Rocket Labs with Charles Paine. We're then going to talk a little bit about their competitive advantage. What are their unique selling points relative to their peers? Then we'll spend a few minutes talking about insider transactions in addition to congressional transactions. And then we'll shift on over and we'll leverage the technology and the information resource TrendSpider to identify, do we have a seasonal edge by buying the stock now, or should we hold off? We'll also do some technical analysis of the charts, and I'm not just talking about a daily chart or an intraday chart. I'm talking about a top-down view, monthly chart, weekly chart, daily chart, Rocket Lab USA, to identify on a multi-time frame view, do we have a setup that provides us a risk-reward entry point now, or should we hold off a while? And then I'm going to wrap it up with my conclusion on the stock. I'll give you some takeaways from my thoughts on the competitive advantage, the technical analysis, and whether or not it's time for you to buy Rocket Lab. So let's get to it. The company was founded back in 2006 by Peter Beck in New Zealand. They're headquartered in Huntington Beach, California, and they've been there since 2013. The industry is the aerospace and defense sector. Specialists the launch services for small and medium class rockets, spacecraft design, and satellite components. Their flagship rocket, the Electron, a reusable small lift launch vehicle designed for dedicated and ride-share missions. Their upcoming rocket, the Neutron, is a medium-lift, partially reusable rocket aimed at competing with SpaceX Falcon 9. Their Photon platform, which is a satellite platform offering end-to-end solutions from design to in-orbit operation. Their global presence, they have launch sites in New Zealand, the United States, with plans for additional facilities. Now, some fun facts about Rocket Labs. They were the first private Southern Hemisphere launch. They achieved this back in 2009 with the Etna 1 sounding rocket. And this one I found really interesting. Their innovative rocket engine, the Rutherford engine, is the first of its kind battery-powered rocket engine primarily using 3D technology. Their unique mission names, known for creative mission titles like Running Out of Fingers and Running Out of Toes for each milestone launch. Record-breaking launch turnaround. They set a company record by launching 2 missions in less than 24 hours from 2 different hemispheres. Now, I think that this is an important point in that the feedback that I've been getting from my sources in the aerospace and defense group, they're viewing Rocket Lab as being the next FedEx, but for space. Wrapping up the fun facts, their space-grade solar cells, they power critical U.S. space missions, including the James Webb Telescope and NASA's Artemis missions. Lastly, leaving it off with their cultural touch, the name Atea is derived from the Maori word for space, reflecting the company's New Zealand roots. Now, on March the 27th of this year, Rocket Labs released an announcement, and this was widely reported. I read it initially in Investors Business Daily, and I will summarize what the announcement meant to the company specifically. In short, Rocket Labs had been selected by the U.S. Space Force to compete for the National Security Space Launch or NS Phase 3 Lane 1 program with a contract value up to $5.6 billion over 5 years. This contract allows the company to compete for high-priority national security missions, including satellite constellation deployments. So this is pretty big. Now, in order to get this contract, they had to meet some really strict eligibility requirements and received a $5 million task order for a capabilities assessment. The company is now eligible, and this is critical on a forward-looking basis. The company is now eligible to compete for future task orders within an SSL, again, the National Security Space Launch. In addition, Rocket Lab's Neutron rocket, designed for medium lift, reusable missions, will be used for these contracts. Neutron can deploy payloads of up to 13,000 kilograms, making it an important asset for national security launches. So, a really positive announcement released on March the 27th. In preparation for this video, I pulled their last quarterly filing and I ran it through ChatGPT, and I queried ChatGPT to break out and bullet point some of the key points. I wanted to know the 3 top pros and the 3 top cons. Now, the 3 top pros: revenue growth. Rocket Lab saw a substantial increase in revenue growth from $244.6 million in 2023 to $436.2 million in 2024, representing a 78% year-over-year growth, primarily driven by higher launch cadence and growth in organic space system products. And I really like this second bullet here: operational efficiency. The company is successfully scaling operations with an increasing number of Electron launches and improved cost per launch efficiency, reflecting the impact of economies of scale and operational improvement. The last pro: expansion into new markets. Rocket Lab is progressing with the development of its Neutron launch vehicle, which will enable it to tap the medium lift launch market and provide more lucrative contract opportunity, enhancing both revenue per launch and its competitive position. As for the cons, the first one, if this was a semiconductor name or any other sector, I would be far more concerned. But let's face it, this is an area that's dominated by big players. I don't know how their dependence on key customers is really avoidable, namely the U.S. government, etc. So Rocket Lab relies heavily on a few major customers for its revenue, and any loss or default from these customers could significantly reduce future revenues and contracted backlog. Now, the second one is a little bit more concerning: operational risk and expansion. The rapid growth of the company, including a significant increase in employee headcount and the complexity of operation, exposes a risk if not managed effectively. Failure to scale operational, financial, and management controls could negatively affect business execution. That makes sense. And lastly, I'm not going to read the whole thing: exposure to space-related risks, basically space junk. That's not unique to the company. I think any company that does business in outer space is going to be confronted with that. Now, with regard to the fundamentals of the company, we'll leverage Investors Business Daily and their research of Rocket Lab. And it being a smaller player in the arena, it's the lowest in the group. However, its relative strength is very, very strong. You don't get much better than this, meaning relative strength relative to the S&P 500. It is outperformed the S&P 500, as is the group, with a relative strength rating of A+. Now, keep in mind that the proposed defense budget for this year is over $1 trillion now. The shares are under accumulation with a B+ score. And this is not mom and pop buying 100 shares of RKLB. This is institutional accumulation, so strong hands. Now, the price change year to date is down 22.5%, providing us with a great opportunity. Management owns 11.6% of the company. We like that. They're going to report earnings on May the 8th. Their EPS change last quarter is 0. They're not making money, long story short. And their 3-year sales growth rate is on average 70%. So very, very strong sales growth. And that's primarily what we're looking at, not necessarily earnings per share growth. We want to see sales. The earnings per share will follow. Continuing on with the fundamental analysis, Rocket Lab, we want to take a look at their Rocket Lab's U.S. gross profit has surged by 126% year over year. That's gross profit, folks. So not net profit, gross profit. They are not making a profit as of yet. And by 22% quarter over quarter. In addition, Rocket Lab's U.S. revenue has soared 78%. I mentioned this earlier, year on year, and by 20% from the previous quarter. Now, the two bottom concerning bullet points are typical for growth stocks. The debt has soared by 165% year on year, and the company equity fell by 31% year over year and by 9% quarter over quarter. These are typical problems for growth stocks. Nothing unusual there. Now, moving on to the financial performance, we know that there's no net profit as of now. But what we can do is we could pause here and we could say, okay, what are revenues looking like in blue? They are rising, and they are rising measurable quarter on quarter. Gross profit in green bar chart, rising. Now, their net income, obviously in orange bar chart, remains depressed. The however is that their gross margins continue to rise, maybe flattening out a little bit here, but they continue to rise. The trend is clear and it's defined, and the net margin is as well clear and defined, and it's rising. The net margin is up 42% year on year and by 16% since the prior quarter. Operating margins are up 40% year on year and 15% since the previous quarter. Now, looking at the valuation, obviously, price to earnings, forget it. It doesn't exist. What we can do is look at price to book, which is well off of its highs, but still elevated relative to the past 5 years. In fact, price to book is 90% higher than the last 4 quarters, average of 13.6. Now, price to sales, it's a little bit more attractive. Rocket Lab USA's revenue has soared 78% year on year and by 20% from the previous quarter. I know I've said that already, but it's worth repeating because when you take a look at the visuals here, we were far more expensive back here in 2021. Price to sales value came in. It's began to expand. It's since pulled back. I think that this is attractive. I like this setup here. To me, I think that we've gone from putting in lower highs to flat to now beginning to press up higher. Now, folks, as we move on to the technical analysis portion of this commentary, we're going to be using our friends over at TrendSpider for a great deal of the information that'll help guide us towards whether or not we pull the trigger on the shares of Rocket Labs. They're one of our sponsors. They are the Bloomberg Terminal for the average trader, and I strongly encourage you to take advantage of their 35% discount that they give me to pass along to you. Just simply use the link below if you watch this on YouTube, link above on Twitter, to head on over and take advantage of that deep discount. So we're going to begin our analysis here of Rocket Labs with a monthly view. We begin with a monthly view because we want to identify where the stock has been to appreciate where the stock may be going. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to link these charts below in the description area on YouTube. So please feel free to reference them at your leisure. So RKLB IPO'd back in 2020. Initially, the open was rejected. It found a bid in September 2021 and then fell into a bear market, creating this beautiful, beautiful W formation or double bottom setup. Here was the pivot point of that double bottom setup at $8 per share. We broke out here September of 2024, and then it was off to the races. We peaked out here January of 2025 and have since pulled back by about 22%. And you can see when I click on the heat map what solid support this became down at around $3 per share. Now, moving on to the weekly chart of Rocket Lab, you can see that we're consolidating between, let's call it $15.50 and $20 per share. Now, the algorithm is not picking up much in terms of support and or resistance in this general vicinity, but we can also apply the automated Fibonacci retracement tool, click of a button, and you can see that $15.50 to $20 per share mark That is our consolidation range on Rocket Lab. Now, drilling down towards the daily chart, things become a little bit more interesting to me because when I apply the chart patterns, you could see that we have a descending wedge formation. This is the algorithm that found this for me. Click of a button. That we are at the upper band of resistance. We had broken through it back here the week of the 15th of April, but we had dropped back down into this trading range. So from a short-term perspective, the share price somewhat bearish in that it could not hold the breakout. Now, on a relative basis, when I overlay using the compare functionality of Rocket Lab relative to SH, that is an aerospace and defense ETF. You could see, let's go back to a weekly chart. You could see that the ETF is outperforming Rocket Lab measurably. However, we need to keep this in mind. This market at current is under a lot of pressure. Bond yields refuse to stay down. And this is a small to mid cap stock. Small to mid cap stocks are highly susceptible to interest rate fluctuations, whereas the larger cap names are not. And when you take a look at the names in this ETF, you have some pretty big names here. Palantir, Northrop Grumman, RTX Corp, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, etc., Level 3 Harris. These are behemoth. They are not as influenced by interest rate fluctuation, whereas Rocket Lab does not have that luxury. Now, when we take a look at Rocket Lab relative to the S&P 500, well, this tells a different story. Here's the daily chart, and you can see that at worst, Rocket Lab is trading consistent with the S&P 500, and at current, as of Thursday and Friday of last week, outperformed the S&P 500. Let's drill down to a 1-hour chart to illustrate how much Rocket Lab, on a very short-term basis, this should not influence your investment decision, on a very short-term basis is holding up relatively well versus the S&P 500. So while it may not be performing with its industry peers, it is holding up measurably well relative to the S&P 500. Now, when we take a look at the seasonality of Rocket Labs in TrendSpider, this is one of the greatest features they have. Now, keep in mind, this is only 4 years worth of data, so it's not a lot of data. Ideally, you'd want more data than this to establish a trend. But you can see the period from February through April is generally a weak time of the year. Now, the good news is that in the month of May through July, it's the strongest seasonal trend that the stock has throughout the year. So on a seasonal basis, we are heading into a favorable time of year. Let's go to a weekly view. Now, this technically, I'm recording this on a Saturday. This updates on a Sunday. So this here will be the new coming week, generally weak as well as the following week. Now, remember, going back to our daily charts and overlaying as I did earlier using the automated chart pattern recognition tool, click of a button, remember that we are trading at resistance. So I view any pullback here as an opportunity to build a position, open a position on Rocket Lab. Now, I've just drilled down to a 4-hour chart and overlaid the daily time frame on top of the 4-hour chart. And whenever you overlap a higher time frame, it appears in dashed line, whereas if a 4-hour trend line were to appear, it would appear in solid line. You could see that this resistance level daily time frame, there's a lot of resistance up there. So what's the game plan? Well, we take out our crayon, we get curious, and we identify where our support levels are. In addition to the daily higher time frame resistance level, and what's shown on a 4-hour time frame is that we have pretty good support right down here at $18.66. If that fails to hold, then we're looking at support at around $16 per share. Remember, these support levels are rising, so subject to change as time goes by. So if you have TrendSpider, just simply set up your alert and ask it to let you know when it touches, bounces, or breaks through, and then you can make the determination as to whether or not you want to begin accumulating a position or you want to continue to watch the position. And there's our alert. We'll keep a little bit of sensitivity on there. We're good to go. Our alert is set. Here it is up here. Now, the analyst community, you're going to see a bunch of holds up here. Wells Fargo, Citizens, Morgan Stanley. They have holds. That's an equivalent of sell. Now, as a contrarian, I view that as a good thing. Why? Well, if all of these names already have buy around the stock, well, unless you get a new bank that comes in to initiate coverage on the stock, well, they can increase their price targets, but they're going to remain at a buy. Right now, we have 3 major banks that have holds that can change to a buy, provide catalyst for the share price to move up higher. Now, with regard to insiders and what they're doing, I don't generally like to look at all inside. I'd like to take a look at the 10% owners. They're not doing anything. The CFO, let's go with the officers of the company. This is the COO, Frank Klein. He sold some stock. We need to keep this in context. Many times they just have automatic sell programs. He sold more shares on the 14th. So this is a good amount of stock that he sold. Adam Spice, he's been doing some selling. And Peter Beck sold some stock back in January. So we have some insiders selling here, but context matters. What we need to do is take a look at the number of shares that have been sold relative to how much stock Adam Spice or the other officers hold. This could be a small amount relative to their overall positions. So context matters. Now, what I thought was very, very bullish was the unusual options activity. You could see quite a bit of call buying. And the way I interpret this data, and you can copy and paste this into ChatGPT, it'll analyze it for you. But to summarize, the strikes show a range of as low as $5 to as high as $37.80. The expiration dates for these options range from early May 2025 to as far out as January of 2027. So to cut to the chase and give you the bullish summary here, there's significant bullish activity at multiple strike prices, particularly for options with a higher premium, such as the 25 strike, the 22 strike. And there were some large sweeps that indicate heavy interest in the short term with the expiration dates. And a couple of trades at the 18 strike for May 2025 suggest there was some protective puts activity or hedging, no big deal. So overall, the options activity here is somewhat bullish. Now, in terms of Congressional Trades here, I exported this list because there's a lot of data here. I exported this list to an Excel spreadsheet, and there are no trades for Rocket Lab, either buying or selling. So no activity in Washington, D.C. thus far, but we're going to be watching. This is really a great tool to have at our disposal. We have all the other insider activity. We've already gone over that. I'm not going to rehash that. So in closing, folks, I think that Rocket Labs has a bright future ahead of it. In terms of the technical, I've mentioned that we have daily resistance. We are in a downtrend channel, short-term downtrend channel. It's been trying to break out. The breakouts have been rejected. The however is that we are building a base, and it's holding up well in a market that is a bit challenging. Now, we'll go back to the 4-hour chart before, and I would be interested in opening up a small position on Rocket Labs as we test these support levels. If it doesn't hold $18.92, then we'll revisit down at around $16 per share. But we stay very small. And then, going back to the daily chart, as we begin to break out and close above the upper band of resistance, and especially if and when we break out to new higher highs and begin to put in higher highs and higher lows, then we get more aggressive to the long side on Rocket Lab. Now, in closing, folks, my opinion of Rocket Labs and the industry are as follows. The industry is in its infancy. SpaceX has yet to go public. When it does, the entire tone of the market is going to switch from AI to outer space. The prelude to the IPO of SpaceX is going to send money into names like Rocket Lab. Now, that's more speculative in nature to be buying in anticipation of an IPO launch by SpaceX. Let's talk about Rocket Labs. Now, Rocket Labs, their fundamentals are very strong and improving. They are rolling out new products, and their revenues are reflecting significant year-over-year growth. So my opinion of Rocket Labs on the short-term basis is a little bit cautious, to be fair. Would I initiate a position at a support level as indicated earlier on a 4-hour chart? Here, yes, I would nibble. But then, of course, I would wait for the continuation breakout. I won't repeat what I said earlier. So I'm very bullish on Rocket Lab's longer term potential, and I'll be watching for a breakout and a continuation move higher, and I would be an aggressive buyer of Rocket Lab USA moving forward. Now, folks, if you appreciate this video, don't forget like, subscribe. You know the deal. And if you see the value in TrendSpider, which provides so much value for the dollar, it's incredible. I strongly encourage you to take advantage of the 35% discount that I give you. And in fact, I believe in it so much that I give it away free to our silver and gold level members, to the contrarian trader. If you're not ready for that, I completely understand. At least get my 35% discount. Use the link below on YouTube, link above on Twitter. And again, don't forget, like, subscribe. Leave a comment below. Do you agree or you disagree? And I'll be more than happy to get back to you. Have a profitable week. Be well.